Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. This is a Conversation with Ari. We're on episode 3 today, and I have with me today my very good friend. I've known him for over 15 years now. He is the one, the only, P Shadows.
Wow, what a welcome that was for the P Shadows. I mean, I've known you for how long is it? It's been 15 years
Yeah,
since secondary school.
more than 15 years, yes.
More than 15 years. I mean, we spent our puberty. Puberty was that time.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to kind of categorize that time, going
Found
back.
ourselves. Lincoln Park was
Oh,
what
yes.
united us.
Yeah, those were definitely the highlights of kind of
Yes.
growing up and
I remember-
childhood, for
Yeah,
sure.
I mean, I remember growing up. I think we were the very few individuals that actually strayed away from the norm. I mean, growing up, we were around a lot of kids that were into their hip hop, rap music.
Yes.
But we sort of strayed into alternative rock.
Yes.
That was evident in our hairstyles.
Oh, yes.
The music that we listened to, and that was truly the start of something where we knew that we were destined for something a bit different,
Yeah.
straight from the norm.
So we were cut a bit different. The grass, we were cut a bit differently than the
Absolutely.
rest, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
And I mean, it just goes to show here we are 15 years later, still in touch, still very, very good friends. And, thank you very much for, taking the time to come into the podcast.
Oh, it's my pleasure. My pleasure.
So this is a podcast. This is a conversation with Ari. It's a conversation podcast about all things life generally. Two people having a chat about kind of anything that's comes to mind that's important. And I'm not sure if you had a chance to listen to the previous 2 episodes at all. We had episode 1 where it was the start of the year, and we were talking about New Year's resolutions, but more in the context of goals.
Yes.
And in episode 2, we extended that a bit more, and we talked about kind of habits, good habits, bad habits, and also routines as well. I'm not sure if you had a chance to have a listen to any of those at all.
I have, and one thing that I did want to pick up on was actually with the New Year's resolution.
Oh, yes.
How studies show that they typically, if the intentions aren't right to begin with, or it's something that's purely driven by time, it seems to be something that lasts at best 3 weeks. It sets you into something called a false hope syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of this.
I probably think I know what it means, but not it may have a very specific definition, but I'll let you expand on it.
No, it's essentially one where you have decided that you want to partake in this behavior. It could be whatever. It could be, for example, going to the gym, learning a new instrument, but you bring it about as a result of the fact that it's January the 1st, as opposed to any true enlightened need to actually do something. And what happens is when you cannot fulfill that goal as such, you basically it tends to have actually a negative impact on you because you feel like you haven't achieved it, and as a result has a negative effect on your mindset. So sort of like a false hope syndrome,
Oh,
as
I
opposed to
understand.
doing something maybe not necessarily when New Year's arises, but something but smart driven, as you were talking about. So SMART goals.
Yes.
Set at any point in the year. It doesn't have to be the 1st of January. It could be November. It could be April. It doesn't have to be, New Year's, start fresh. Why does it have to start fresh in January? Why not when you're truly ready to embark on this journey?
I completely agree with you in what you're saying there. It's the preparation for embarking on a goal needs to be correct. So you need to be, like you say, ready to embark on it. It shouldn't be set by kind of an arbitrary kind of point in time, which would be
Absolutely.
the first of January of the year. And I think what you're also kind of going on to say is that if you are starting a big goal, something obviously you're setting a goal for a reason. It's probably important to you that you either want to, read a book a month, or you want to lose weight or get more physically active. But if you're starting at the wrong time, and it's not, you've not done the correct preparation, the fact of not achieving the goal within your kind of psyche can have a very negative impact, because it will deter you from wanting to, set your tasks or set other things to do as
Absolutely.
well, isn't it? Because you've now got the feedback of, well, I don't want to say failing, but being unsuccessful with what you've started. And if you
It's a
accumulate,
negative feedback loop, essentially.
exactly, if you accumulate enough of those things where you've started 10 things and not done 10 things, then in your recent psyche, that's what you're going to remember. when you
Absolutely.
embark on something new. Whereas if you actually develop a good habit and start 10 things, it could be small things, but you started them, you see them through,
Yes.
then actually when you want to take on something bigger, what you then have is within your kind of recent experience, you have that positive achievement and self belief that you can see something through.
Absolutely. It's like a reward and punishment mechanism.
Absolutely.
Operant conditioning, I believe they call it.
In,
Where
in psychology, yes.
absolutely. And this also brings me on to what was mentioned in the previous podcast about procrastination.
Oh yes,
Um,
we mentioned that on a slide. We didn't go into it deeply, but we did kind
yeah,
of touch upon it. Yes.
I think there's quite a few things that we can talk about procrastination. Now, first of all, I wanted to ask you the question: why do you think people procrastinate? Let's go deep into this. First of all, we need to know thy enemy. Thy enemy is procrastination, and in order to combat it as such, we need to know why people procrastinate. So, what is your interpretation of why do you think people procrastinate?
Yeah, I mean, I shared on the podcast very kind of briefly. I think that there's more than one reason why someone
Absolutely, a
can
multitude of factors.
why someone can kind of procrastinate. But I think for me, the reason for me was the main one was that kind of perfectionist kind of idealism, and also the fact that if something didn't particularly kind of challenge me, so for example, if there's a task that needs to be done, like a chore, say I need to kind of do the laundry or do the dishes, as soon as I figured out how I need to accomplish it, so the puzzle, that's the puzzle part of it. As soon as I know how to do it, then it's not very appealing to me anymore, because that was the fun of the task, how to do it.
Sure.
Doing it's easy, but the problem is that because that's not very kind of exciting to me, I don't end up kind of going about and doing the easy stuff, if that makes sense. And in the end, it can get kind of put off a bit later. What were your thoughts with regards to that?
Okay, so I was reading a book by Piers Steele. It was
Okay.
on the temporal motivation theory,
Okay.
and basically he came across he basically devised an equation about motivation, right? And it goes as such: motivation equals expectancy times value divided by impulsive times delay. Okay, so the four coefficients that can contribute
Yeah.
towards a procrastination is expectancy, value, impulsive, and delay. So if you want to raise your motivation, then you need to somehow manipulate these coefficients,
I
right?
understand. Okay.
So first of all, expectancy. Let's talk about expectancy.
Hmm.
That is your belief that you can complete the task.
Hmm.
All right. Now, in order for you to know that you can actually complete the task, you need more details of the task at hand
Yes.
and break it into sizable chunks. Then it makes a big problem into a smaller problem,
Yes.
right? Value is how valuable the reward the task will give you, right? So what you can do is, if something is not necessarily holding much value,
Yes.
you can set up additional rewards with that particular task at hand. So for example, washing up the dishes
Yes.
may not necessarily hold much value, but you can say, okay, if I wash X amount of dishes, I'm going to treat myself to a chocolate, for example.
Yes.
All right? That's another thing. Impulsive. So the likelihood that something will give you instant gratification. So, for example, that's something that actually prevents you from being motivated. So it might be, for example, you might have a distractive factor. So what you might want to do is, we know that social media can be quite distractive. So
Yeah.
you can disconnect yourself from social media to make yourself less vulnerable to distractions. And the final coefficient is delay.
Yes.
How long will it be before you have to wait to get that reward? Now, when you plug that into an equation, if you can reduce the impulsiveness and the delay bit of it, and increase the expectancy and the value bit of it,
The motivation will then kind of be at a
Increase.
higher value.
absolutely. So it's about tweaking these four parameters. It doesn't have to be all of them, but just tweaking them in your particular task at hand. But first of all, you need to identify those four values and the task at hand.
Okay, so I mean, so what I have here, just to kind of summarize, so there's the four coefficients there, and expectations. So if you want to kind of climb a mountain or go on a hike, really, if you break it down into different kind of heights you want to reach within that mountain, let's say, so sizable
Absolutely.
chunks. So it makes it within your mind, a tall task can appear more kind of, approachable and achievable, right?
Absolutely.
And then in terms of value, so some things inherently have kind of value. So, if you're going to do something hard, you may kind of generally get the satisfaction, but there may be other tasks, like you say, which inherently don't have much value at all, but they need to be done because, they just need to be done, like, say, the dishes or the laundry or something like this. But what you can do is using this kind of the psychology, the reward stimulus kind of mechanism, if you can
Yeah.
set something up within yourself, knowing that it exists within all of us, it's a kind of, it's not necessarily a flaw, but it's something you can exploit, knowing that it exists within mammals, let's say, stimulus and
Absolutely.
reward. If you can devise something where you
But
can have,
also, just going back to the washing the dishes,
oh yeah,
surely, surely washing the dishes, surely washing the dishes will cater for a more cleaner environment, and we know that a clean, homely environment is a more productive environment. Because if you
yeah, of
can't change
course.
the vicinity of your own home, how can you change the world?
No, no, absolutely. It's just as an example, but it can be kind of, anything really, which may kind of have a kind of relatively smaller value to something a bit more kind of hard and arduous, let's say. But
Sure.
but what you were saying is within those tasks, if you're finding that the value you give it, for example, is low, you can also attribute external value to it in a kind of
Absolutely.
reward-based system, so
Exactly.
that,
By association.
yeah, exactly. So that can help you increase the motivation, let's say, with just by giving
Absolutely.
it more value. And then in the other two kind of coefficients you mentioned, impulsiveness. So that's more in the context of excluding distractions and kind of things
Yeah.
that will take your attention away from the task at hand. Is that right? Or
Absolutely.
yeah,
So
okay.
obviously, we know that social media is quite a big thing nowadays, with the Instagram culture, Snapchat
Mm,
culture, Facebook culture. I mean, that we need to tread very carefully about how much time we spend on that. I'm not saying completely disconnect yourself from it,
mm.
but the amount of time that you attribute in a day to social media needs to be monitored. You'd be surprised how much time you actually spend on it.
Yes, I think you can actually get some apps, and I think in certain
Yes.
mobile software, it's kind of built in already. They have like these trackers, so they can track within the week how many hours you're putting into a particular app, whether it's YouTube or whether it's Instagram and things. I think, oh, just on the topic of that, I mean, that was a very interesting topic in itself, and I was going
Yes.
to make it a feature of another podcast episode where I wanted to ask whether or not with the invention of modern technology, whether or not we're actually designing certain things out of our life, in particular, possibly even physical activity, just simply in the sense that you can get anything to your doorstep these days, literally. You can
Sure.
literally get anything to your doorstep with kind of technology these days. But we'll go on that in a little kind of, in a separate show.
Sure.
Um, I think with social media, it gets a kind of bad kind of plug in terms of how much time we can spend on it. It's kind of related to things like anxiety and other things like that. But I think it's one of those things where it's how you use it, isn't it? Because it
Absolutely.
has the potential to be used for a very, very good purpose
I
if you
mean,
really
just think
wanted
about
to.
this
Yeah,
concept where we have the world's knowledge at the palm of our hands. I mean, how amazing is that?
yeah.
That you can literally acquire knowledge from the entire world at the palm of your
And,
hands with internet on your phone.
yes. It's like
So
you
it's
can acquire it at an exponential rate compared to any other time in history, probably.
absolutely. So it's about how you utilize this technology. I mean, it has a with obviously science has a propensity to have to create marvelous inventions, but also disastrous one. Like for example, nuclear weapons.
Yes,
Um,
exactly.
and so it doesn't necessarily. So technology can have a good thing and a bad thing associated with it. So
No,
it's
and
how you use it.
yes, and so we talked about the three parameters. The last kind of coefficient, the delay. So is that delay in relation to the reward or
Yes, absolutely.
okay,
How long
yeah.
will you have to wait before you get that reward? So obviously, if it's something that you think that is going to be such a long time before you can actually get that reward, you
Hmm.
might, you might be less inclined to do that particular task at hand. I mean,
Hmm.
it's quite interesting. Da Vinci was, some say he was a master procrastinator. Have you heard of
Okay.
this?
No,
I
I've
believe
no,
it
no.
took him
Go ahead.
16 years to complete the Mona Lisa.
Okay. Which
So
is
correct me
obviously
if I'm wrong, but this is what I read somewhere. It took him
okay.
16 years to complete the Mona Lisa. Now, obviously, we know that the Mona Lisa is a masterpiece in terms
Yes.
of its epic proportions and its relation to the golden ratio and whatnot.
Yes.
But I mean, what was going through Da Vinci's mind? We know he was a genius of his time, an enlightened individual. What was going in his mind? Did he know when the Mona Lisa was going to be completed? Did he have an end date?
It's very difficult to know. Do you feel as though he had that perfectionist kind of side of him where
Oh, absolutely.
he didn't want to kind of just produce any old thing. He wanted to
Absolutely.
make sure it was right. And I guess, I don't know, part of that is being in the right mind frame to approach the task as well. But obviously, as you say, the end product in the end was something that's gone down in history as like a, truly a work of art.
And this also brings me on to a concept called paralysis by analysis.
Okay.
This is, for example,
I think
as you
I've
know,
heard of this, but I'm not gonna carry on yet.
yeah, I mean, as you're aware, I like going to the gym,
Yes.
and I come across quite a lot of individuals who have done quite a lot of research into the mechanics of bodyweight exercises, weights exercises, nutrition, the science behind it, but not actually getting their hands dirty and actually doing something and starting somewhere. So I think there is a obviously we know that perfectionism is an ideal that is dangerous to try to achieve.
Yes.
It's better to start somewhere and then constantly reflect on what you're doing. So you do something, then you go back and reflect on what you're doing. Then you improve it. Gradually, you're incrementally improving something rather than just saying, okay, I've got the perfect blueprint, I'm now going to follow that.
Yes. And
it's a process. It's
absolutely.
a process, a dynamic process. It's not I've got a static blueprint and I'm going to follow that. It's a dynamic. You learn things as you go along. The knowledge I've acquired now with regards to how to perform certain exercises is way superior than the knowledge I had when I first started out. And if I had that knowledge then, I would have been able to achieve the results that I have now in a much shorter space of time. But it's been a process for me.
Yes, and I think that kind of comes on to kind of quite tangentially what you've kind of said about how we in this generation have all the information available to us on the internet, so that we are able to learn from others, so you don't have to go through a process ourselves as such. But when it comes to things like this, you do need to kind of, like you say, it takes 10,000 hours or something to become an expert in kind of most things. So you have to put in those, that many number of hours into something. And I think coming back to also expectation side of things, you need to kind of accept that if you're going to do a task, like say if you're going to be working out or getting fit and active, each performance you put in, each session you put in, they're not going to all be completely perfect. And obviously some are going to be better than others, and some are going to be worse than others. That's just the reality of it. So it's more about getting on and doing it where you'll get the most results, as opposed to waiting for that premium moment where you're the most ready to put in a great performance. But if that means you do it infrequently, you may not actually be any better for it in the long run.
That's correct. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you there.
No, thanks for kind of sharing those very helpful insights. I've written some of those points down as well.
I just wanted to actually also pick on what you said about how we learn from other people. It's a very kind of proverbial lesson that I sort of abide by, which is a smart person will learn from his own mistakes.
Yes.
But a wise person will learn from someone else's mistakes.
Yes.
So that is what
I've heard that before.
I try to look at what other people do and the mistakes they make, and say, okay, what can I do to prevent this, rather than going through the path of making that same mistake myself? Why would I want to put myself through that when I know quite clearly that someone else has done this and has basically failed from it? So why not learn from someone else's mistake?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's kind of what the education system tries somewhat to do, is that when we're going through kind of school and learning, you may say that there's some students that are brighter than others, but really what they are learning is things that other people have figured out. It's not as if someone's figuring out the Pythagorean theorem by themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
They're learning something that someone else has figured out, so they don't have to go through 5 years to figure out that a squared plus b squared equals c squared, for example. So there is, you need to learn from others, absolutely. But I think probably what you're doing is that reflecting part of it, that bit deeper step, it's not just observing, it's kind of deeply thinking about kind of what they're doing and why they were unsuccessful and things like this.
Yeah, agreed.
No, brilliant. So I think we've probably touched upon some of this points already earlier on, but the focus I wanted to give to this podcast was, building on the habits and routines, but going on to motivations and drive. So you kind of formulated motivations in a quite a very, tangible way that most people can then kind of think about. My question is, do you think that, as you've broken it down into those four components, but do you feel that most people are thinking about motivation in that way?
I think what it is first of all, we have to find out why. What is your why, first of all? Why do people do what they do? When they can answer this question, then they can then begin to delve into what motivates them into doing what they do. So what makes you get up in the morning?
Exactly.
If it's for the purpose of going to work, okay, then you ask the second question. Why do you work? Why do you work? For what reason? Is it financial? Okay, fine. Once it's financial, what are you going to do with the money?
Exactly.
So you start to think about, you need to first of all find out what your why is, and this sort of brings me on to the purpose about why I do what you do.
Yes.
So you can this is quite interesting, and you, obviously the followers of your podcast can answer these questions as well. But I was watching a TED talk which allows you to identify your purpose using these basic questions.
Was it like an algorithm of sorts? You kind of...
No, it's just questions. It's 5 questions.
Okay.
Who are you? What do you do? Who do you do it for? What those people want and need, and how they change as a result.
So it's who are you?
Who are you? So my name is Priyesh Patel. What do I do?
Yeah.
So what is it that you do? So it could be your work. It could be a particular hobby that you do. Who do you do it for? Do you do it just for yourself?
Yeah.
Do you do it for a family member? Are you a provider? Are you a carer?
And
what do these people need? Do they just simply need financial help? Do they need your emotional support?
Yes.
And how do they change as a result of it? Are they getting a positive feedback from it? Are you getting a sense of purpose that is greater than yourself? I always find that those people that are the most happiest are the ones that have an outward facing vision, one where it is greater than yourself.
So you find that the things that they're doing it not for themselves, but they're doing it to give more for other people. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. So something that transcends materialism. I mean, it's all good and well having a nice car, a nice house, nice clothes and whatnot, but that will make you happy to a certain extent, I believe.
Yes.
From what I've read from enlightened individuals, and we know that even from the mainstream media, we can see that there's a celebrity, despite how much money they have, they always tend to have mental health problems which they have not yet been able to reconcile with, because perhaps they may have gone down the path of materialistic, tangible desires as opposed to a vision that is greater than themselves, perhaps.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think there's multiple examples of people who are less kind of well off and are quite content. I wouldn't say kind of happy. I would say content. Kind of they've kind of comfortable, and they have their priorities. They're kind of what's important to them kind of in order. And equally, you have those on the other end of the spectrum where they have an abundance of wealth, but they can equally be very incontent of kind of what's kind of going in and around themselves. That's
right. So I think, I mean, in summary, everybody has to have that kind of introspective time. At some point in the day, you should actually practice introspective thinking, where you actually delve into who you are. A lot of the times we like to read about novels about other people, like Harry Potter or Adventures of so-and-so. But really, we should be assessing the novel of our own life, where we are the central character. What has made us who we are? Why do we do what we do? Why are we the way that we are? Why do we behave in a certain way? The more we learn about ourselves and the more we unlock the secrets of our mind, the more we are in one with our mind, then we will be able to get into that mind frame where we would be able to harness the strength of our mind and become our inner God, essentially.
I think that's absolutely right. I think you'll find that general theme across most kind of theology, if that makes sense. Kind of, it starts with kind of knowing oneself first, isn't it? You needed to, and I think it's not kind of directly linked, but within kind of psychology, they have these kind of types of thinking, what they're called, like type 1 thinking, type 2 thinking. Have you heard of this?
Are you referring to the dual system theory, the system one, which is the automatic, quick intuitive thinking,
Yeah,
which is a slow, controlled, methodological way of thinking.
yeah, exactly. So you have, I feel as though the majority of the time, and kind of going back to what's mentioned earlier, the kind of social media side of things, we kind of
Yes.
live in a world of all these distractions and, TV, phone, all these things in and around us.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to kind of have, particular kind of short automated type of thinking where
Yeah.
it's like you just simply ask yourself, oh, what do I feel like eating today for breakfast? Or what do I feel like doing? Do I feel like going to the movies? And you think about the question for only like a brief moment, yes or no. It's a very
Yes.
subconscious response based on your feelings at the time.
Yes.
There's no conscious deep thought that goes into the response really. Your body kind of just does its own kind of check about things and kind of gives, kind of almost blurts out an answer based
Yeah.
on your
And
mood
you
and
know what that
feeling.
is, right? In layman's term, that is essentially your gut feeling, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel as though we haven't designed a routine in our lifestyles, the majority of people I'm talking about here,
Yeah.
where we kind of take a moment and just take a good 20 minutes, 30 minutes in the day to engage in the very deep kind of conscious thinking where you kind of, it's kind of like mindfulness. You're kind of aware of the now, and you're kind
Yeah.
of like, you're thinking about why am I doing what I'm doing now, and it kind of relates to, where am I on my trajectory of what I want to achieve? Like, we don't tend to engage in that type of thinking often enough to
Yeah.
then and you can see it manifest in time. If you don't do that enough, if you don't check in with yourself with where you are enough, it's inevitable that you probably will, have problems to do with, depression or low mood or feeling, not content with where you are, because you've been kind of always, you know, using that automated thinking the whole time. And, 5 years has gone down now,
Yeah.
and you're not really where you are, where you wanted to be, because you've not really kind of like checked in and things.
Agreed. Agreed. Because you haven't had that, because it's just absolutely with what you're saying with mainstream media and how actually the puppeteers of these mainstream media and the advertisements that we see quite are aware of this sort of neurodynamics about system one and system two type ways of thinking, and
Yes.
how they know this well and truly, and how they sort of subliminally direct you into this sort of way of thinking where everything is quick and instinctive and appealing almost to your limbic system, your lizard brain, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, I've come across that in a couple of books, the lizard brain, and
Yeah,
but it's absolutely true. And I think that again comes back to knowing oneself. If
yeah,
you're aware of these, I wouldn't quite call them weaknesses, but these kind of like, fundamental kind of like these slight flaws we have that can, within ourselves, because we're like, we're a kind of a human being. We're not kind of robotic, kind of machine type people. We are, influenced by
mm,
feelings, and they have a big part on decisions we make and things like that. But if you're aware of that, you can kind of do more to be more in line with your, let's say, values, as
yeah,
opposed to your feeling at the time. Do you see what I mean? So
yeah,
you want to be more congruent with your overall, let's say, your mission statement. So say if you ran yourself like a business or something,
yeah,
your value, what do you stand for, what are you
yeah,
wanting to achieve? If you stood more by that, as opposed to your feeling at the moment in time, you may actually be able to achieve a lot more in kind of what you want to do.
yeah. And my question to you is,
Oh yeah.
what do you do? Obviously, you're a very well-established individual,
Okay.
from my understanding, anyway. But how do you practice introspective thinking? And do you, for example, do you meditate? Do you take some time off in the day to say, you know what, who am I as an individual? What do you do? What are your rituals?
Yeah, so that's a very, very good question. I was wondering the day when someone's going to ask me this, and I knew it would come out one day.
It had
Um,
to be me.
yeah, no, it's a very good question. The honest answer to that question is it's a dynamic process.
Mm,
So it's something that I don't feel as if I've completely perfected, but it's something that from a very kind of early young age,
mm,
I've kind of realized that the way to kind of succeed and achieve more in life is by deeply thinking about these things about kind of, who I am, what do I want to stand for, what's my kind of legacy that I want to leave behind, what kind of person do I want to be. If
Absolutely.
you can
Yeah.
start by, so you can, there's this thing where you start with the end in mind, right? So you start with,
Yes.
or not to take a very dark turn, but say if someone's saying your eulogy, when it comes to your time, and your time is up, someone's saying your eulogy at your funeral, or what would you have want said about you, the person you were, what you represented, what
I
you
like that.
brought to people's lives, what do you want to represent? Like, if you're going to be remembered, what kind of memory do you want people to have of you? And if you can have that in your kind of mind, to start
Yeah.
with that, then you can start to take this thing backwards.
Reverse
Kind of
engineering.
reverse engineering. That's what I was looking for.
And did you get this from Seven Habits of Highly Effective People? Because one of the points is begin with the end in mind.
Yes, that's one of the
One
habits.
of the things, yeah. Then you sort of work backwards. So
Have you read the works of Stephen R. Covey?
I have, I have,
Yes. Well,
I have.
what were your thoughts of that? Because I know you've read a few different kind of books kind of related to that area, so you may be able to give a more kind of balanced perspective on.
I mean, I think you know what. When I read the book, I basically broke down the points, and basically what I did was I made a table, and I think this is something that we can do in any profession.
Mm,
That doesn't matter what profession we are in, because often what we do is we read a book, but we don't really act upon it, or we don't really do any sort of application based stuff on it. We
yes.
just read it for the sake of a tick box. Oh, have you read this book? Seven Habits. Have you read this book, 48 Laws of Power? But what I like to do is I like to find out what these actual seven habits were, and then I make a table, and then I say, okay, how can I apply this in my daily life?
Yes.
So I made a table, and then how I could basically apply it. So some of the things, like one which actually stood out to me was seek first to understand, and then to be understood.
Yes.
Often I find when you're talking to somebody, you often are talking to them with the intention of replying back, as
Yes.
opposed to truly understanding what the person wants to say. Now, whatever knowledge you have is the knowledge you have, and if you're just solely driven in just talking to somebody and not and essentially just saying what you already know, how can you learn? I rather take a back seat and try to let the other person talk more,
Yes.
so that I can learn more and add on to my own knowledge base.
No,
Whether
and
it could be a person from any walk of life, it could be any culture, just simply learning rather than simply waiting to just respond on what they say because you already have a predetermined answer.
no, I think you're absolutely right. There are so many. There's quite a few countless kind of analogies given in that book. There's also like
Yeah,
an audio recording and a tape as well, which I think
yeah,
maybe shares a few other ones as well. And I think,
yeah.
you're absolutely right. There's a lot of, I think what you've described there is kind of active reading, whereby you're
Correct.
reading a book, but you also, I don't know, you either have on your phone or in another book, you're writing down the kind of salient points
Yes.
like within it, because there's no point just simply reading it and absorbing it, but if it doesn't change, or you don't kind of make any change or impact in yourself, then really the impact is kind of lost, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're able to kind of, because we all have those moments, we're reading a book and you read a particular passage or a sentence,
Yeah.
and it just makes you stop and you look up and you almost like gaze off into the distance, and you kind of just you pause for a moment. And I think those are the times where I like to write things down, because
Yeah.
it's such a profound thought that you've able to apply laterally to something else, and you want to like hang on to it for a bit, because something good can come of it as well, isn't it, in the future.
Absolutely.
um
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, where the question here now is just since you've brought this up,
oh yeah.
how do you manage um, anything interesting that you've read? Say you've read something interesting. Where do you write it down? Do you have do you write it down on a piece of paper? Do you have a system, like a organized set of notes that you accumulate? Because what I use something quite interesting, which your
Okay.
followers may want to delve into, is something called Evernote. I don't know if you've heard of that.
No, but is it like an app or a program, or?
You could get an app of it. It's on the web as well. It
Okay.
allows you to basically manage your notes. There could be notes on anything.
Yes.
And then essentially create notebooks from these said notes.
Okay.
And then obviously in that you can basically set yourself short-term, long-term goals. Anything interesting that you've read, you can just write it down. It could be anything.
Okay.
It just helps you organize because it creates a sense of rigidity, a way of you, making your thoughts a little bit more coherent rather than just them fluttering in your head and never being able to apply them at some point.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a couple of different systems. So I have like a notepad, like a moleskin kind of notepad that I
Okay.
often.
I hope it's vegan-friendly, moleskin.
I'm not entirely sure, but I often write some things in there, all sorts of different things. So they can be things like from books and things that I've read. Sometimes I've got like an entire page where I've just written down a bunch of people that have inspired me. So I've
Sure.
they're just like a bunch of like people in my life. Some of them are celebrities, some of them are not, but that I just find particularly inspiring because I think
Yeah.
it's quite good that if you ever reach a kind of particular low point or you're wondering what to do, you can just have a look at that and just simply seeing the name and what they represent to you, right, can just give you so much kind of energy. Like there was something I wrote in the context of motivation, but in say like your passion. So like they're kind of related, like what your motivation is and what your kind of passion is. So if you can discover what you're passionate about, what they say is therein lies your life force, your burning ember, and that's something that you need to kind of nurture and keep it, rekindled, to make sure that it stays ablaze. So
Wow.
I think it's for me, I use this kind of notepad space in lots of different ways. So one is like I've got a page of people and things that kind of inspire me. I've got like other kind of like passages and things and kind of thought processes that I've kind of written down. If I'm perfectly honest, I probably don't use it as much as I should, because what I do, I let it sit there for a little bit, and when I get another moment, I kind of look back onto it and I kind of then build up upon what I've written down.
Fine. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not sure if you have anything like that at all that you have as a kind of a drawer of like, or sometimes I even write down just kind of very positive things. So
Yeah, like an affirmation essentially, right?
yeah, because I think sometimes it's good, like if you've ever had a boss or a supervisor or someone that you value, basically, that's
Yeah.
basically critiqued you in an honest way, something that you agree with, and giving you some positive feedback. Sometimes it's actually good to just have that written down somewhere, because that's your go-to reference for
Yeah.
kind of making your kind of your mental energy is staying kind of nice in a positive mindset, because that's you're quite vulnerable from lots of external stimulus that can
Yeah.
make you feel negative. Like if you put on the news, you probably see a negative news story more likely than you'll see a positive news story, and without yourself realizing it, within your subconscious, your way of thinking can be altered. If you got quite a strong mindset, probably not, but generally speaking, you can never know what effect these truly are having on you.
I tend
So
not to. I tend not to watch the news very much for this very
consume the
same
main,
reason.
yeah.
Purely because what you see always is usually agenda-driven,
Absolutely.
propaganda-based, and also tends to evoke more negative feelings rather than positive ones. So as a result, I tend to dissociate myself from that. If
Yes.
there's something that I want to learn and find out, I will do my own independent research and independent study, but I wouldn't do it based on obviously. Growing up, we did history together, didn't we?
Yes.
And GCSE history together, and we basically learned a crucial lesson from that. That whenever we are presented with a piece of information, we need to understand who wrote it, when it was written, what was the
Yes.
purpose of the source.
Yes.
Remember those essays that we were doing? So, I
Absolutely.
mean, I carry this forward. That's an important lesson that I've learned from history
Yes,
lessons.
and I think that goes back to what you're saying, knowing yourself is because you're self-aware of how these things can kind of impact and what negative things they can be, and you also know that they don't give you any positive value in your life. Because you're aware of that from your self-awareness, you are then actively choosing to cut that out from your
Yes.
day to day, because actually this is not making me productive, this is not really kind of helping me in any kind of particular way.
Not at
um,
all. It's basically it's knowing for the sake of knowing, whereas you can't really make too much of a difference.
Exactly.
Uh,
There's one other thing I wanted to talk about in the context of kind of motivations,
hmm,
and you've given those kind of four kind of components of the particular equation,
yeah.
but I think with something like motivation, you also get other kind of value from being very motivated. Like I think it can be very kind of quite transformative in terms of your mindset.
Mhm.
And just like if you just take the example of movies, or like
Yeah.
say like you mentioned Harry Potter, so we can go into Harry Potter again. Like you have like the main protagonist, and
Yes.
they have a goal. They're motivated to do said particular goal, you know in the movie,
Can I
get
just
from
add,
A.
actually, while we're on this, before
Oh yeah.
we talk about this further, because this is very interesting that you mentioned Harry Potter.
Okay.
Now, Harry Potter is very interesting in the sense that we mentioned it in a different context, but in the purpose of actual purpose, I wanted to go. I wanted to talk about something called the self-fulfilling prophecy. Now,
Okay.
prior to Harry Potter doing what he actually did and eventually defeating Voldemort and ridding the wizarding world of this of the tyrant that he was,
Spoiler
um,
alert. Yeah.
he had no idea that that was what his purpose was going to be.
Yes.
It was a self-fulfilling prophecy in the sense that he was told
Yes.
that he would be the one to lead to his downfall, and it was a prophecy that was
And
told,
and he
right?
was then taking the steps to make sure that he did that role, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
now
yeah.
this brings you on to teaching young individuals that it just gives you it just gives you an insight into how, from a young age, if you are told that you can achieve greatness, that is something that you linger on with, and that becomes your motivation and drive. That, you know what, I've heard this so much about myself, I have to live up to the expectations. On the contrary, if you're told constantly that you're a failure, you're not going to achieve
Yes.
much, that has a dire consequence on your psyche. You tend to take a
Absolutely.
step back and say, you know what, there's not much that is expected of me. Let me just conform to this.
I think you're absolutely right. The human mind, as we've kind of alluded to at different points in this show, is very fragile to that kind of information, especially when we're young.
Yes.
Having that positive messages and energy, and telling that you will go on to do great things. Just having that sit can actually drive someone, to achieve really great things. But conversely, there's the other side where constantly putting someone down can
Yeah.
affect what their expectations they put on themselves to really achieve in life. And it comes back to right at the start of the show, we talked about the resolutions and how it can have a negative impact. If you start to set out to do something but you don't do it, you get a negative feedback from not achieving that task. And if you do that enough times, your actual self-confidence can be low as a result.
Yeah.
Whereas, so it's the same with this. If you've been exposed to those experiences that have uplifted you and motivated you and made you have a self-fulfilling prophecy to do great things, you probably will.
Yeah.
Equally, if you've had enough bad experiences where people have just put you down, even though you're actually doing good stuff, you can equally see how that what kind of impact that can have on someone.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, like you say, we live in the information age. Everything's available at our fingertips. But really, I think education-wise, there's something about the education years won't necessarily get shorter, because I feel as though within the kind of the human person, until they reach maturity, that's not necessarily getting shorter with time, really, is it? The information available to everyone for everything is quite there,
Yeah.
but you're not really an adult until you're an adult, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
there can be a 10-year-old kid that knows
What does
everything
it
to
mean
do
to
with.
be an adult? I mean, when you say an adult, are you talking about the emotional growth, or are you talking about the physical manifestations? Because the thing is, what an interesting way of looking at things is, while we can physically see the manifestations of our growth, i.e., your limbs are getting bigger,
Yeah.
or your organs are getting bigger, or you're
Yeah.
physically getting bigger in height, you
Yeah.
get developing facial hair.
Yeah.
That is a physical marker of your growth as an adult.
Yeah.
But what markers are there to suggest that you're growing emotionally? And this is
Mm.
where people tend to stay in a childlike mentality, because they don't actually grow emotionally, because they haven't had the opportunity to introspectively grow.
Yes. So I agree with that. I think that's something that you can't always check in on quite so readily, can you? As you can with the physical things that you can see.
Yeah, and society doesn't actually push the need to actually even do this.
But I think kind of my kind of point was more to the fact that even though there could be a 12-year-old kid that can learn kind of accounting to like
Yes.
the ACCA kind of standard, really, but
Yeah.
really with that extra knowledge, he's not going to be able to apply it necessarily until maybe he's kind of emotionally kind of mature and kind of within society mature, because I think that still takes a lot of time to kind of achieve. So even though they may know the knowledge of how to build a PC at the age of 10, for example, I think until they're, there's, even though we can get information a lot younger,
Yeah.
I still feel like one of the rate limiting factors is kind of, as a human species, we still need those certain years to mature as a whole person until we reach kind of adulthood and things like that as well. So
Yeah.
there's all of that as well.
Yep. Agreed.
So we were talking about Harry Potter. Sorry, we had a little kind of
Yeah, so we talked about Harry Potter.
yeah.
Now, let's talk about some other characters. What other characters have you come across that
Frodo.
Frodo Baggins.
Yeah, no, I'm just how I'm thinking. But my main kind of point I wanted to make with regards to these kind of protagonists in kind of films is
Yes.
that within their purpose and motivation, you get so many other kind of beneficial features. It almost feels as though they have the increased tolerance to pain. They can endure hardship. They can they also have like a very narrow kind of focus. They don't kind of get distracted by other things going on around the side, and they can make difficult decisions as well when they've got that focus and motivation and drive as well. And that's kind of the other thing with regards to motivation that you can obtain whilst trying to get your goal, which can be used to your benefit as well, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, this is about what I was saying, essentially, how you need to be the hero in your own novel, essentially. Why can't you be the Frodo in your life?
Yes.
I mean, the ring is a metaphor, destroying something that is evil, but you could be fighting your own personal demons, and until you acquire what you want to do, your motivation has to be strong. That will allow you to endure any sort of hardships because you have a set motivation and you have a set goal in mind.
No, I think that's absolutely true, because what we've talked about is that the different components that can affect one's motivation, but also we've talked about when you are quite a nice, fully committed and motivated, all the other kind of benefits you can get alongside it to kind of endure pain. Like if you're wanting to get physically fit and active, you'll be able to, your endurance is more. You can lift that kind of heavier weight or kind of endure that more just because of that mental motivation you give yourself allows you to kind of achieve feats that you may not have been able to achieve otherwise.
Yeah, these extra sort of additional
Yeah, it's kind of like a, I'm not sure if you've watched Dragon Ball Z, but it's kind of like...
What sort of question is this?
I know.
Have you seen the recent Super Broly?
Oh yes, dude. I'm very, very, very excited for that. But
no, it's already out. I've seen it.
Oh, have you? Oh, I need to watch that.
You need to watch that. It's really good.
But I'm not talking full Super Saiyan, but I'm talking about Kaioken. You know what I mean?
Oh, Kaioken, yes,
yeah.
Kaioken, yeah.
I'm not talking about Super Saiyan just yet, but I'm talking about Kaioken. Is there how you can feel when you got that drive and passion and motivation to do something? But right. I think that was the main things I wanted to talk about on this show. I think it's been a very show filled with loads of kind of like salient points, takeaway messages. You know what I like about the podcast? If someone listened to the show, I want them to then feel like motivated to then like make a change or incorporate something or reflect on their own life. Like in the first one, we talked about goals. Like if that's inspired someone to set some goals and making some smart goals, that would be really great. We talked about habits and routines. If that's made someone reflect about their own habits and what they can do. And in this show, I think we've talked about so many like great things as well. Is there anything you want to kind of like end on?
Just add on to the motivation element of things. I just wanted to say that rituals help with motivation. So just making sure that you've got a very ritualistic sort of lifestyle, because it adds a bit of rigidity. Like, for example, just simple acts like getting up at a certain time, going to bed at a certain time, regular meals. Because what this is doing is basically reducing forthcoming anxiety. If we can reduce anxiety, then we have better understanding of how the next day will be panned out. So, for example, use a calendar very wisely to design your day. Because what that does is it reduces the fear of the unknown. It knows that tomorrow at this time I will be doing this sort of thing, rather than being anxious about what is the next day going to hold for me.
Absolutely. So because you can't prepare for everything, but if you can prepare for what you can control, what you already setting yourself up for is that familiarity in the morning or whatever, like you say, you're
Yes,
going to be doing,
absolutely.
and within that will come your comfort, and
Yes.
to kind of then deal with, you can then deal with anything that gets thrown at you because you're
Yeah.
already within a nice comfortable kind of space.
And
um
another thing I also wanted to say, sorry, was that don't feel like you have to do this all alone. One of the actual messages from the seven highly effective traits of successful people
yeah.
is synergy or synergistic thoughts, basically, which is how
Hmm.
you sort of need to learn to rely and use other people wisely. In a sense that understand that we are social creatures.
Yes.
Establish a good network of friends that can help you in achieving these goals. Don't feel like you need to conquer the world on your own. Maybe there could be a friend that can help you achieve certain goals a bit quicker. Delegation. So, and create a good supporting network around you. So it's about acquiring these individuals as well. So that's one thing that I wanted to say, because often when we're talking about motivation, often people think it's a solely
Hmm.
centric focus on yourself to do things, but you can acquire help from other people, absolutely, in you achieving your goals. Don't feel fear to do that. We are, at the end of the day, social creatures.
I think that's absolutely true, and I think that's kind of exhibited through kind of society over the years. Anyway, a lot of the great feats and technological advances have not come from one person. It's come from two
Yes.
industries combining together. Like the synergy, as you say, like two things together, is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes.
And I think it's something to kind of reflect on how we all are surrounded by great people in our lives. Is how we can create like a win-win. Which is probably the best for both parties to really kind of help each other
That's right.
achieve goals. And I think everything, and even the friendship as a whole, will be more productive and kind of will grow as a result. Really, to be honest with you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Just fortify your relationships that you have.
Yeah. Oh no. Anyway, thank you so much, P Shadows, for being on the podcast. We'll be glad to have you back again if you got the if you're willing to.
Absolutely. Anytime, buddy.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so
It was
much.
amazing. All right.
All
Cool.
right, guys. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. Hope you gained something from it. If you'd like to see more on any particular topic, please let us know in the comments down below, and we'll see you on the next one. See you.